The sun had just begun to set over the grand estate, casting a golden hue on the lush gardens and glistening fountains. Guests arrived in luxury cars, wearing outfits that cost more than most people made in a year. It was the wedding of the year. No, the decade. Adrian Pierce, the 27-year-old tech millionaire, was marrying a simple, small-town waitress named Emma Hayes. Everyone had their questions. Why her? How did they meet? What was so special about a girl with no pedigree or fame? The rumors had started weeks before the wedding. People whispered about her background, speculating that Emma had some sort of leverage on Adrian, or that he was just caught up in a whirlwind romance. None of it made sense. Adrian, after all, was the most eligible bachelor in the country. He'd built a tech empire from scratch by 24, owned a fleet of private jets, and had been featured in Forbes 3 times. Women practically threw themselves at him. And yet, here he was, ready to marry someone who served coffee and pancakes for a living. The mansion itself was a symbol of excess. A sprawling ballroom had been adorned with chandeliers imported from France, orchids flown in from Japan, and golden accents that made the room shine. The guest list was as exclusive as the decor. A-list celebrities, CEOs, political figures, anyone who was someone was there. People exchanged smiles and greetings, but there was one thing on everyone's mind: Emma. When she finally walked down the aisle, every head turned. Emma was stunning, no doubt about it. Her dress, a masterpiece of silk and lace, hugged her figure in all the right ways. The diamonds on her tiara sparkled under the soft glow of the chandeliers. But for all her beauty, there was something unsettling about her demeanor. Her expression, though soft and elegant, held a flicker of something that no one could quite place. A secret. The ceremony proceeded flawlessly. Vows were exchanged, and Adrian's voice wavered with pure emotion. He loved her. That much was clear. But as Emma smiled back at him, there was a glint in her eyes that sent chills through the room. Then came the reception. Guests enjoyed champagne, lobster tails, and live orchestral music as they chattered about the strangeness of it all. Adrian couldn't have been happier, though. He danced with Emma under the soft glow of fairy lights, looking at her as though she were the only person in the world. And that's when it happened. During the speeches, Emma took the microphone. Guests expected the usual: heartfelt thanks, a sentimental anecdote. Instead, her first words sent a ripple of shock through the room. "I'm so grateful to be here today," she began, her voice soft but steady. "But there's something you should all know about me." The murmurs began almost immediately. Adrian froze, his smile faltering. Emma looked directly into the crowd, her gaze unwavering. "My name isn't Emma Hayes," she said, pausing to let the words settle. "And I'm not the person you think I am." The room fell into complete silence. Forks stopped clinking, and champagne flutes froze mid-air. Adrian's face went pale. He turned to her, his voice barely a whisper. "What are you doing?" But Emma wasn't done. "I've kept this secret for years, and today felt like the right time to come clean. Adrian, I love you, but there's more to my story than you know." Gasps echoed through the crowd. Adrian's mother, a woman who never lost her composure, dropped her glass. Guests exchanged frantic whispers, their eyes darting between Emma and Adrian. And then she said it. But I'll save that for part 2. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The music faded into a ghostly echo, and the glittering chandeliers above dimmed in comparison to the shock written on every face. Emma stood there, holding the microphone, her knuckles white against its sleek handle. Adrian was frozen, his eyes locked onto her as though trying to decode the words she'd just said. "My real name is Emily Richardson." The crowd broke into stunned murmurs. That name, Emily Richardson, meant something to those paying attention. A couple of guests exchanged glances, their brows furrowed in recognition, while others were too shocked to process it. Adrian's jaw tightened. Emily Richardson? That was a name he hadn't heard in years, but it didn't make sense. "I changed my name after what happened 6 years ago," Emma continued, her voice calm but purposeful. "I didn't think I'd ever have to talk about it again, but I owe it to you, Adrian, and everyone here to finally tell the truth." Adrian snapped out of his stupor, rising from his seat. "Emma, what are you doing?" he said, his voice just loud enough to cut through the tension. She looked at him then, her eyes soft but resolute. I'm sorry, Adrian. I never wanted to lie to you. But the truth was always going to catch up to me. A man near the back of the ballroom whispered too loudly, Emily Richardson. Isn't she the girl who disappeared after that accident? That was it. The pieces clicked together like some grotesque puzzle, and the room broke into chaos. The murmurs turned into outright whispers, gasps, and side eyes. Adrian, suddenly aware of everyone staring at them, moved toward Emma, grabbing her gently by the arm. Come with me. Now. She didn't resist. The two of them moved quickly out of the ballroom, the whispers growing louder behind them. Adrian pushed through a side door into a private lounge, slamming it shut behind them. His breathing was heavy as he turned to face her. What the hell was that, Emma? It's Emily, she corrected softly. Don't play games right now, Adrian shot back. His face was a mix of anger, confusion, and something else, fear. You've been lying to me this whole time? Who are you? What's going on? Emma sank onto the edge of a leather couch, her hands trembling slightly now that they were alone. 6 years ago, I was involved in something terrible. It wasn't entirely my fault, but the media crucified me. I couldn't go anywhere without being recognized. People threatened me, called me a monster. So I ran. I changed my name. I tried to start over. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, pacing back and forth. An accident? That's what this is about. Emma flinched. It wasn't just an accident. Someone died. Adrian. His pacing stopped cold. What? She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. It was my fiancé. We were driving home late one night. He was drunk, and I didn't stop him from getting behind the wheel. The car crashed, and I survived. He didn't. People said I killed him. His family, his friends, they all blamed me. I blamed myself too. Adrian stared at her, his face unreadable. And you didn't think to tell me any of this before? You let me fall in love with someone who isn't even real? I am real, Adrian, she whispered. I'm the same person you fell in love with. I couldn't tell you. I thought if you knew, you'd leave me. He turned away, his hands on his hips as he tried to process it all. The woman he thought he knew, kind, humble, innocent, was suddenly a stranger. Worse, she was carrying a past so dark it could destroy everything. A knock on the door startled them both. Before Adrian could answer, his mother swept in, her face pale but composed. Adrian, she said quietly, the guests are talking. We need to decide how to handle this. Adrian turned back to Emma, his voice strained. Did you know this would happen? Did you plan this, on our wedding day? Emma shook her head desperately. No, I didn't plan to say anything. I couldn't stand there and keep lying while we were supposed to be starting our lives together. You deserve the truth, even if it hurts. Adrian looked at her long and hard, then turned to his mother. Tell everyone the reception is over. Adrian, now, he said sharply. His mother gave Emma a final icy glare before slipping out, leaving the two of them in heavy silence. Is this it then? Emma asked softly. Are you done with me? Adrian didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at the woman he thought he loved, realizing for the first time that he didn't know her at all. But even as he struggled to process everything, something nagged at the back of his mind. There was more to this story. There had to be. And he wasn't ready to walk away without knowing the full truth. Start from the beginning, he finally said. Tell me everything. And Emma did. But what she revealed next was something no one, especially Adrian, could have ever expected. Emma's voice was steady, but her face revealed just how fragile she felt in that moment. After the accident, it wasn't just the grief that ruined me. It was the truth no one else knew. Adrian sat down across from her, his arms crossed, jaw tight. What truth? Emma's gaze dropped to her hands. I wasn't the one driving. Silence. Adrian blinked as though he misheard her. What? She took a shaky breath. My fiancé, Ethan, was behind the wheel, but his family didn't care. They were powerful, Adrian. His father practically ran the town. When the investigation started, they twisted the story. They needed someone to blame, and I was an easy target. The drunk fiancé who let it happen. Adrian exhaled slowly, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. Why didn't you fight back? You think I didn't try? Emma's voice cracked. I had nothing. No money. No family to defend me. And no one believed me. Not after the media turned me into a villain overnight. So I ran. I changed my name. I disappeared. And I promised myself I'd never look back. Adrian leaned back, his expression unreadable. The pieces were starting to fit together, but something still didn't sit right. Why now, Emma? Why tell me this today? Here, in front of everyone. Emma looked up, her eyes locking onto his. Because someone found me, Adrian. I got a letter this morning, no return address, no signature. Just 3 words. I know everything. Adrian's expression darkened. Who sent it? I don't know, she admitted, but I couldn't let them use it against me. Not now. Not when you deserve to hear it from me first. Adrian ran a hand over his face, processing what he'd just heard. This wasn't just a mistake from Emma's past. This was something far bigger. Someone out there wanted to expose her, and they had chosen today, of all days, to strike. Before either of them could say another word, Adrian's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and felt his stomach drop. It was a text from an unknown number. A single photo. When he opened it, his blood ran cold. It was Emma, standing in front of the wrecked car on the night of the accident. Her face was smeared with tears, her clothes stained with blood. And beneath the photo, a caption. Your perfect bride has secrets. How much is she really worth to you? Adrian's hands shook as he turned the screen toward Emma. Explain this. Emma's face went pale. I don't know who sent that. Adrian stood up abruptly. Someone is playing games, Emma, and I'm going to find out who. But as he walked toward the door, Emma called after him, her voice trembling. Adrian, please. I need you to believe me. He stopped but didn't turn around. I don't know what to believe anymore. And with that, he stepped out into the hallway, leaving Emma alone with her past, and the storm that was only just beginning. Adrian's footsteps echoed down the marble hallway as he moved through the sprawling mansion. His head was spinning. Who sent that photo? How did they even get it? The image wasn't something pulled from a news story. It was too raw, too private. Someone close to Emma, or Emily, had been holding on to this for years. As he reached the reception hall, most of the guests were already leaving. Adrian's mother spotted him and hurried over, her expression stern but controlled. Adrian, she said in a low voice, what's going on? People are talking. They're saying your bride. I don't care what they're saying, Mom, he interrupted sharply. Where's security? I need to know if anyone suspicious came in or out today. His mother blinked, taken aback. Security? Adrian, this is your wedding, not a crime scene. Just find out, Adrian snapped, already pulling out his phone. He dialed his assistant, Logan, who had handled much of the wedding planning. The man picked up immediately. Mr. Pierce? Logan, I need a list of every vendor, every staff member, and every guest who stepped foot on the estate today. Send it to me now, Adrian said, his voice firm. Of course, sir. Is everything all right? Just do it. He ended the call before Logan could respond. Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that someone in that room, maybe even someone he knew, was responsible for the letter and the photo. Whoever it was had planned this perfectly, knowing it would shatter his trust in Emma. Back in the private lounge, Emma sat alone, staring at the empty space where Adrian had stood moments ago. Her chest felt heavy, like someone was sitting on it. She knew what that photo meant. It wasn't just a threat, it was a message. They found me. Suddenly, the door creaked open. Emma looked up to see Adrian's mother step inside. Her sharp heels clicked against the floor as she approached. I knew there was something off about you, she said quietly, her voice dripping with contempt. You think you can just waltz in here and marry my son without consequence? Emma swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. I haven't done anything wrong. Oh, please, Adrian's mother scoffed. Girls like you always have something to hide. I don't know how you manipulated my son into this ridiculous marriage, but I promise you, whatever secret you're keeping won't stay buried for long. Emma's hands curled into fists in her lap. I didn't manipulate anyone. I love Adrian. You love his money, his mother shot back, narrowing her eyes. But you won't get away with this. Not in my family. Without another word, she turned and swept out of the room, leaving Emma feeling more alone than ever. Adrian sat in his private study, staring at the list Logan had sent over. He scanned every name, looking for anything or anyone that stood out. That's when he saw it. At the bottom of the vendor list was a name he didn't recognize. Evan Richardson. Adrian's heart skipped a beat. Richardson. The same last name Emma had just admitted was hers. His mind raced. Could it be a coincidence? Or had someone from Emma's past infiltrated their wedding? He didn't waste a second. Adrian grabbed his car keys and headed straight for the parking lot. He needed answers, and he knew exactly where to start. As he pulled out of the estate and sped down the winding roads, Adrian's phone buzzed again. Another text, this time, a single line of text beneath the same photo. If you want the truth, meet me where it all began. Adrian frowned, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Where it all began. His mind flashed back to the countless conversations he'd had with Emma about her childhood, her hometown, and the place she'd sworn never to return to. He muttered under his breath, Ravenhill. It was the town where Emily, had grown up. And if whoever was behind this wanted him there, then that's exactly where he was going. But what Adrian didn't realize was that by chasing the truth, he was walking straight into a trap that had been waiting for years to spring. Adrian gripped the wheel tightly as his car sped down the dark highway, the city lights behind him fading into nothingness. The name Ravenhill echoed in his mind like a haunting refrain. Emma had mentioned it only once, and the way she said it, her voice tight, her expression hollow, made it clear that place was nothing but a ghost to her. Now, whoever sent that message wanted him there. The drive was long, and the further Adrian went, the more the roads became empty, desolate, like the kind of place you didn't stop unless you had no choice. His phone buzzed again. Another message. Don't keep me waiting. You know who I am. Adrian tightened his jaw. Evan Richardson. It had to be him. Emma never mentioned a brother, but it was the only connection that made sense. Adrian refused to believe this was a coincidence. When he finally reached Ravenhill, it was exactly as he imagined. Small, broken down, forgotten by time. A sign half hidden in weeds read "Welcome to Ravenhill." It was rusted and sagging. Adrian slowed the car, his headlights sweeping across darkened storefronts and empty streets. There was an address attached to the text message, an abandoned diner on the edge of town. When he pulled up, the place looked like something out of a horror movie. The neon sign buzzed faintly, half the letters dark, leaving only DIN illuminated. Adrian stepped out of the car, the cold air hitting him like a slap. He scanned the area, his footsteps crunching on gravel as he approached the diner's entrance. The windows were filthy, but he could see a faint glow of light inside. Someone was waiting. Pushing the door open, a bell above tinkled weakly. Inside, the diner was worse. Dusty booths, overturned stools, and a jukebox that had probably stopped working decades ago. And there, at the far end of the room, sat a man. He was alone at a corner table, a single candle flickering in front of him. Adrian Pierce, the man said, his voice deep and gravelly. You're braver than I thought. Adrian narrowed his eyes as he stepped closer. The man looked rough, mid-30s, scruffy beard, dark eyes that seemed to hold too many secrets. Evan Richardson, I presume? Evan smirked, leaning back in his seat. Took you long enough to get here. Adrian ignored the jab. What do you want? Why are you doing this to Emma, to us? Evan's smirk faded. He stared at Adrian for a long moment before answering. You don't know her at all, do you? You think she's some innocent girl who stumbled into your perfect life. He shook his head. She's not who you think she is. Adrian's patience snapped. I'm sick of the cryptic games. If you have something to say it. Evan leaned forward, his expression dark. You think the accident was the worst thing that happened to her? That's what she told you, didn't she? Adrian froze. What are you talking about? Evan let out a cold laugh. There's more to the story, Adrian. Things she didn't tell you. Things she'll never tell you because if you knew, you'd leave her in a heartbeat. Adrian's chest tightened. Tell me. Evan's eyes gleamed as he reached into his jacket and slid something across the table. Adrian hesitated before picking it up, a faded photograph. He looked down at it and felt his stomach drop. It was Emma, years younger, standing next to a man who wasn't her fiancé. They were both smiling, arms wrapped around each other. But it wasn't the photo itself that made Adrian's blood run cold. It was what was written on the back. The night we buried the truth. June 17th. Adrian looked up sharply. What does this mean? Evan stood, slipping his hands into his coat pockets. It means you've only scratched the surface, Mr. Pierce. The girl you married is hiding more than you can imagine. And if you really want answers, you'll have to dig them up yourself. He turned and walked toward the door, leaving Adrian alone with the photo and the chilling words on its back. Adrian's hands shook as he stared at the date. June 17th. That was the night of the accident, or so Emma had claimed. But now it was clear there was more. Much more. And he wasn't sure if he was ready to know the truth. Adrian sat in the abandoned diner, staring at the photograph Evan had left behind. The candle's flame flickered, throwing dancing shadows on the walls as if mocking his confusion. The night we buried the truth. June 17th. The words felt heavier each time he read them. The man in the photo wasn't Emma's fiancé. He was someone else entirely. Adrian turned the photo over again, his thoughts racing. What truth? Who was this man? With a sudden resolve, Adrian shoved the photo into his pocket and marched back to his car. If Evan was playing games, Adrian needed answers from the one person who could give them to him, Emma. The drive back to the estate felt endless. Adrian's thoughts twisted into knots as he gripped the steering wheel. Had Emma lied about everything? He didn't want to believe it, but every new detail chipped away at his trust. When he arrived, the mansion was quiet. Most of the guests had long gone, and only a handful of staff lingered, cleaning up the remnants of what was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. Adrian stormed through the empty ballroom and up the grand staircase to the suite where Emma had been waiting. When he pushed open the door, Emma was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in her wedding dress. The tiara had been removed, and her hair was tousled, strands falling over her tired face. She looked up at him, her eyes weary. "You're back," she whispered. Adrian held up the photograph, his hand trembling. "Who is this?" Emma's eyes widened in shock as she stared at the photo. For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. "Where did you get that?" "Your brother, or whoever he is, gave it to me," Adrian snapped. "He says there's more to the story, Emma, that you're hiding something bigger than the accident." Emma stood up slowly, her hands trembling. "You talked to Evan? Don't act surprised. You knew he was here, didn't you?" She shook her head, her voice breaking. "No, I didn't. I haven't seen Evan in years." Adrian's anger flared. "Then explain this. Who is this man? What does the truth we buried mean? Because, God help me, Emma, I'm running out of reasons to believe you." Tears welled in her eyes as she sank back onto the bed, staring at the floor. Her voice was barely a whisper when she spoke. "His name was Marcus." Adrian froze. "Marcus?" She nodded, her gaze distant. "He was Ethan's best friend. The three of us grew up together in Ravenhill. Marcus, he loved me. He was there for me after Ethan and I got engaged, and things got complicated." Adrian narrowed his eyes. "Complicated how?" Emma swallowed hard. "After the accident, Marcus told me he knew the truth, that Ethan had been driving. But he said we couldn't prove it. Marcus and Evan, they came up with a plan to cover it up, to make the story go away. But Marcus didn't want to bury the truth. He wanted to bury me with it." Adrian blinked, the words chilling him. "What are you saying?" Emma looked up at him, her tears spilling over. "Marcus blackmailed me. He said if I didn't disappear, he'd tell everyone I was the one who caused the accident. He promised to ruin me, to destroy my life. So Evan helped me run. I changed my name. I left everything behind." Adrian stood there, his chest heaving as he tried to make sense of it all. "And now Evan's back. Why? Why is he trying to expose you now?" Emma shook her head. "I don't know. Evan always resented me for leaving, but he's never tried to hurt me. If he's here now, It's because someone else is pulling the strings. Adrian paced the room, his mind racing. Marcus, Evan, Emma. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to form, but the picture they created was still blurry. He turned back to Emma, his voice calmer now. Do you know where Marcus is? Emma looked at him, her eyes hollow. No one's seen Marcus in years. He disappeared not long after I did. The weight of her words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Adrian realized then that the truth wasn't just buried. It had been hidden, and someone, somewhere, was determined to dig it up. Adrian's phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. You're getting closer, but you're not ready for what comes next. Adrian's grip tightened around his phone. He looked at Emma, his expression hardening. Whoever's doing this isn't going to stop, he said. If we want to get ahead of them, we need to find out what really happened that night. All of it. Emma wiped her tears, nodding slowly. Where do we start? Adrian held up the photograph. We start with Marcus. Adrian barely slept that night. He sat in his private study, the photograph of Marcus and Emma still clutched in his hands. The words, "the night we buried the truth," burned into his mind like a scar. The messages, Evan's reappearance, and Emma's revelations were all pieces of something far darker than he'd imagined. At dawn, he decided it was time to act. Adrian needed answers, and the only lead he had was Marcus. If Marcus had disappeared shortly after Emma, someone had to know where he went. By mid-morning, Adrian found himself parked outside the sheriff's office in Ravenhill. The building was small, its paint peeling, a relic of a forgotten town. A tired-looking sheriff, probably in his 50s, sat behind the desk. His nameplate read Sheriff Clay Whitman. Whitman barely looked up as Adrian approached. "Morning. What can I do for you?" Adrian pulled the photograph from his pocket and laid it on the counter. "Do you know this man?" His name was Marcus. He lived here about 6 years ago. Sheriff Whitman's eyes flickered to the photo, his expression freezing just for a second before he looked back at Adrian. Never seen him before. Adrian narrowed his eyes. "Don't lie to me. I know Marcus was here. He disappeared shortly after my wife, Emily Richardson, left town." At the mention of Emma's real name, the sheriff's face darkened. "Richardson, huh?" He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "She caused enough trouble in this town to last a lifetime. Why are you digging up old ghosts?" "I want the truth," Adrian said firmly, "and you're going to help me find it." Whitman sighed, rubbing his temples. "Marcus disappeared 6 years ago, same as you said. Officially, it was ruled as him skipping town. But unofficially?" He looked Adrian dead in the eye. "We never found a body." Adrian felt his stomach drop. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Marcus didn't just disappear, Mr. Pierce. People around here think something happened to him. And your wife, Emily, was the last person anyone saw him with." Adrian's blood ran cold. "You think Emma had something to do with it?" The sheriff shrugged. "All I know is, people don't vanish without a reason." Adrian turned and stormed out of the sheriff's office, his mind racing. If Marcus didn't leave town, and there was no body, what had happened to him? Back at the estate, Adrian confronted Emma, his voice sharper than he intended. "Did you have something to do with Marcus's disappearance?" Emma looked horrified. "What? No. Adrian, I swear to you, I ran. I didn't look back. I never saw Marcus again after that night." "Then why does everyone think you were the last one with him?" Adrian demanded. Emma's hands trembled. "Because I was. He showed up that night, June 17th, begging me to stay. He said he could protect me, that he'd tell the truth about Ethan. But I didn't trust him. I thought he was just trying to trap me. I left him standing there at the edge of the lake, and that's the last I ever saw him." Adrian froze. "The lake?" Emma nodded. "Ravenhill Lake. It's where everyone in town went to hide their secrets. It's deep and dark." Adrian's thoughts raced. No body, no answers, no closure. If Marcus had disappeared near that lake, there was a good chance that's where the truth was buried, literally. He turned back to Emma, his tone softening. "You need to come with me. We're going back to Ravenhill Lake." Her face went pale. "No, Adrian, you don't understand. That place, I don't care," Adrian said firmly. "We can't keep running. If the answers are out there, we're going to find them. The sun was sinking low as Adrian's car pulled up near Ravenhill Lake. The water stretched out like a black mirror, reflecting the faint orange glow of the evening sky. The place was eerily quiet, save for the soft rustling of trees and the lapping of water against the shore. Emma stood beside Adrian, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "I haven't been here in years," she whispered. "It feels cursed." Adrian ignored the chill running down his spine and scanned the shoreline. "Where did you last see Marcus?" Emma hesitated before pointing to a small dock, half-rotted and sagging into the water. "There." Adrian nodded and started walking, his shoes crunching on the gravel. Emma trailed behind him, her breathing shaky. When they reached the edge of the dock, Adrian crouched down, inspecting the wooden planks. Something caught his eye, carved into the wood, faint but visible. It was a single word, liar. Emma gasped. "That wasn't here before." Adrian turned to her, his face grim. "Someone's been here recently." Before Emma could respond, a sharp sound echoed through the air, footsteps, heavy and deliberate, coming from the trees behind them. Adrian spun around, his heart pounding. "Who's there?" he shouted. The footsteps stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then a low voice drifted out from the shadows. "You're closer than you think, Adrian." Emma grabbed Adrian's arm, her voice trembling. "That's Evan. I know it's him." Adrian squinted into the trees, his fists clenched. "Show yourself." But there was no response, only the faint sound of retreating footsteps disappearing deeper into the forest. Adrian's blood ran cold as he turned back to Emma. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Someone wants us to find the truth, but they're playing with us. And we're not leaving until we figure out what really happened here." Emma glanced at the dark water of the lake, her voice barely a whisper. "I just hope we're ready for it." The air at Ravenhill Lake grew colder as night set in. The wind cut through the trees, sending ripples across the dark water. Adrian stood at the edge of the dock, his flashlight scanning the surface of the lake. Behind him, Emma clung to herself, her gaze darting to the shadows of the forest where Evan's voice had come from. "This place, it feels wrong," Emma whispered. Adrian didn't answer. He crouched down again, staring at the word carved into the wood, liar. His gut told him it wasn't just a taunt. It was a clue. "Whoever did this wants us to think Marcus is here," Adrian muttered, mostly to himself. "But why now? Why drag this out 6 years later?" Emma exhaled shakily. "Because someone still knows something, or they want us to find what was hidden here." Adrian stood, turning toward her. "You said you left Marcus here that night. You didn't see or hear anything else after you ran?" Emma shook her head. "No, I ran straight out of town. I didn't stop until I knew I was safe. Marcus was alive when I left him. I swear it." Adrian was about to respond when a faint glow caught his eye near the water's edge. He walked closer, shining the flashlight into the reeds. At first, there was nothing but dark, wet grass. But then, partially buried in the mud, he saw it. A metal object reflecting the beam of light. Adrian crouched and reached down, his fingers digging into the cold, damp ground. Slowly, he pulled it free, a rusted key dangling from a broken chain. "What is that?" Emma asked, stepping closer. Adrian held it up to the light, inspecting it. "It looks like a key to a lockbox, or maybe a storage unit." He turned it over in his hand, noticing faint initials scratched into the metal. "Mr. Marcus Richardson," Adrian said under his breath. Emma's face paled. "What does it mean? Why would this still be here after all this time?" Adrian's mind raced. "It means Marcus didn't leave town voluntarily. Whoever left this here wants us to find out what he was hiding. There's something more, something bigger than the accident." A rustling sound echoed behind them, and both Adrian and Emma spun around. The beam of Adrian's flashlight swept across the trees, but there was no one in sight. The silence was deafening. Then, out of nowhere, Evan's voice rang out again, low and mocking. "You're so close, Adrian, but you won't like what you find." Adrian's flashlight flickered as he whipped it toward the sound, his fists clenched. "Evan, show yourself." There was no answer. only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. "This is a game to him," Adrian growled, spinning back toward Emma. "But I'm done playing. If this key leads to what I think it does, we're about to find the answers they've been hiding." By morning, Adrian had tracked down the key's origin. The number 76 was faintly etched into the shaft, which led him to a storage facility just outside Raven Hill. The place was decrepit and mostly abandoned, with rows of rusted units stretching far into the distance. Adrian drove through the gates, the gravel crunching under his tires. Emma sat quietly in the passenger seat, staring out the window, her face pale. "Are you sure about this?" "We don't have a choice," Adrian replied, his voice firm. "Whoever left that key at the lake wants us here." He parked the car and stepped out, the early morning mist thick around them. Storage Unit 76 was in the farthest row, its padlock rusted and hanging loosely. Adrian held up the key and slid it into the lock. With a click, it opened. "Stay back," he told Emma as he pushed the heavy door upward. The interior was dark and musty, filled with dust and cobwebs. Adrian stepped inside, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. Rows of boxes were stacked haphazardly along the walls, some of them marked with Marcus's initials. "Adrian," Emma whispered nervously, peeking inside. "What is all this?" Adrian ignored her, his focus fixed on a single box in the center of the unit. Unlike the others, it was clean, as though someone had placed it there recently. He crouched down and opened it, his breath catching when he saw what was inside. It was a file, thick, stuffed with documents, photos, and handwritten notes. On the top was a faded police report dated June 17th. Adrian picked it up and scanned the first page. Victim: Ethan Hale. Driver: Emily Richardson. Witness: Marcus Richardson. Adrian's heart pounded. This is the original report," he said, his voice low. "The one they buried." Emma stepped closer, her hands shaking. "That's not possible. They said I was the driver." But Adrian pulled out a photo tucked into the file and froze. It was Marcus, standing near Ethan's wrecked car, talking to someone just out of frame. But it wasn't Emma. It was Evan. Emma gasped. "Evan? Why would he?" Adrian looked up, his face dark. "Because he was there that night. He knows what really happened, and he's been holding it over your head this entire time." Suddenly, a voice echoed from the entrance of the storage unit. "Congratulations, Adrian. You figured it out." Adrian turned sharply to see Evan standing just outside the unit, his arms crossed and a sinister smile on his face. "What do you want, Evan?" Adrian demanded. "Why drag us through this?" Evan stepped forward, his smile fading. "Because it's time for the truth to come out. Emily ruined everything that night. She wasn't supposed to survive. And now, you're going to pay for digging too deep?" Before Adrian could react, Evan pulled something from his coat, an old, crumpled lighter. "You want the truth?" Evan said, his voice cold. "It burns with me." With a flick, he tossed the lighter into the unit. Flames erupted instantly, licking at the walls and boxes. Adrian grabbed Emma's arm, pulling her back as the fire spread rapidly. "Run!" Adrian shouted, dragging her toward the entrance. Evan stood outside, watching with a twisted satisfaction before disappearing into the mist. Adrian and Emma stumbled out of the unit just as the fire engulfed everything inside. Adrian turned back, his chest heaving as he watched the flames consume the evidence. "The truth! It's gone," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. Adrian's jaw tightened. "No, it's not. Evan wanted us to see this for a reason, and I won't stop until I take him down." As the fire raged behind them, Adrian knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Evan had started a war, and Adrian was going to finish it, no matter the cost. The smoke from the burning storage unit rose into the air, twisting like a dark omen. Adrian stood beside Emma, both of them coughing, their faces streaked with soot. The fire had destroyed the evidence, but Adrian's resolve burned hotter. Evan had pushed them to the edge, but now it was Adrian's turn to strike back. "We're not done," Adrian said, his voice hard. "He's playing with us, but I'm going to end it." Emma wiped her tears, her voice trembling. "But how? The file is gone. The truth isn't just in that file, Adrian interrupted. Evan knows something, and he can't hide forever. The next few hours were a blur. Adrian used every resource he had, calls to private investigators, trackers, and his own security team, to hunt Evan down. It didn't take long. A tip from one of Adrian's contacts led them to an abandoned cabin deep in the woods outside Raven Hill. Adrian drove there with Emma in silence. The tension between them was thick, but they both knew this was it. The answers were waiting, and they weren't leaving until they had them. The cabin loomed in the clearing, its windows dark and its walls weathered by time. Adrian parked the car and turned to Emma. "Stay close to me." She nodded, gripping his arm as they approached the cabin. The door creaked open under Adrian's touch. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of damp wood and dust. A single light bulb flickered above, casting eerie shadows. And there, sitting at a wooden table, was Evan. "You found me," Evan said, his voice calm, almost amused. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes cold and unfeeling. Adrian stepped forward, his fists clenched. "It's over, Evan. You're going to tell us the truth. All of it." Evan smirked. "The truth? You sure you want it, Adrian? Some secrets are better left buried." Emma stepped forward then, her voice shaking. "No more games, Evan. Why did you come back? What do you want from us?" Evan's expression darkened. He pulled something from his pocket and tossed it onto the table. A small, silver locket. Emma gasped. "That's mine," Evan nodded slowly. "I kept it after that night, Emma, as a reminder of what you cost me." Adrian's patience snapped. "What happened to Marcus?" Evan's gaze turned sharp. "You really want to know? Fine. Marcus didn't just disappear that night. He followed Emma to the lake, thinking he could convince her to stay. But Marcus had secrets of his own. Secrets he didn't want getting out. He threatened to tell the truth about the accident unless Emma left with him. But he pushed too far," Evan continued, his voice colder now. "There was an argument, a fight, and when it was over, Marcus was gone." Emma's voice broke. "You killed him?" Evan's eyes narrowed. "I did what had to be done. Marcus was a loose end. And you were supposed to disappear too. But you ran, and I had to clean up your mess." Adrian's blood ran cold as the full weight of the truth hit him. "You framed Emma for the accident. You let her take the fall to cover your tracks." Evan's smirk returned. "And it worked, didn't it? Until you decided to dig too deep?" Adrian stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. "You've ruined enough lives, Evan. This ends now." Evan shrugged, unbothered. "You can't prove anything. The evidence is ash. My story is the only one that matters." But before Evan could move, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance. Adrian smiled faintly, pulling his phone from his pocket. "You're wrong. I recorded everything." Evan's face fell as the realization hit him. Adrian had baited him into confessing. Within minutes, the police arrived, storming the cabin and dragging Evan away in handcuffs. For the first time in years, Emma's nightmare was over. Epilogue: weeks later, Adrian and Emma stood together by Raven Hill Lake, the water now calm and still. The town had learned the truth. Evan had been arrested for Marcus's murder and for falsifying the accident report. The dark secrets that had haunted Emma were finally exposed. Adrian turned to her, taking her hand. "It's over now." Emma smiled softly, though tears still glistened in her eyes. "I spent so many years running from this place, from my past. I never thought I'd feel free again." "You are free," Adrian said. "No more lies. No more ghosts." As they stood together, the sun broke through the clouds, its light reflecting off the lake like a promise of better days. The truth had cost them both dearly, but it had also brought them closer. And for the first time in a long time, Emma allowed herself to believe in a future, one where the past no longer defined her.